All right, so today we're talking about built-in objects and collections. And so there's a file for us to download for January 25th, air traffic passenger statistics. Just go ahead and download that. It is an XLSM file, even though it's not, there's no code in it yet. So you'll have to unblock it to be able to open it on Windows and so forth. So you remember, way back from the very first day of class, we talked about what an object is. So who can tell me what an object is? An object is a thing. That's right, it's a thing. It's just a thing that we're going to manipulate through code. And specifically, it's the kind of thing that has properties like, and all a property is just like variables. It's like a bunch of variables. Properties are just variables that are put together in this object. And then it also has behavior. It has methods. Method is just like a sub-procedure that's built into the object. And so this object knows how to do stuff. It's got properties and so forth. And so there are several objects, of course, they're just built into Excel that we just use. We'll see how we could create our own. Well, we can see how we can create some that aren't part of Excel anyway, later in the class. But because there are so many objects, in fact, how many objects are there, like just on that one worksheet that we're showing right now? Just take a guess. If you're going to guess, just get the right order of magnitude. It's like at least 20 million, right? Each one of those cells is an object. Each one of those cells is an object. And there's 1.04 million rows. There's 16,000 columns. That's a lot of objects up there. Now, you can imagine that trying to refer to all those objects like individually would be difficult. And so the idea is that we have a thing called a collection. Collection is itself an object. So object, what's an object? It's a thing that has methods and properties. But a collection is an object that allows us to work with other objects, like oddly enough, collections of other objects. And so one of the collections that we have is like the collections of all of the cells on a workbook, on a worksheet. I don't even know if if the number is probably so big that we can't even refer to it. Let me just come to my immediate window here. And so let me just say print my active sheet set.cells.count. I don't know that it's going to do that. It's too big of a number. The number is so big, Excel just can't deal with it. So let's do active sheet dot columns one dot count. Active sheet columns one dot cells dot count. There we go. Okay, so in the first column of my sheet, by the way, columns is also a collection of objects. So columns is a collection of ranges, but specifically the ranges that are like a whole column. So I refer to one of those, it's a column. So in fact, let's just do this. Let me just ask how many columns there are. So this is one of the properties that collections have, that every collection has this property called count. So if you've got a reference to the collection, you can ask how many items are there in that collection? Because what a collection is, it's an object that holds references to other objects. So you can almost think of this collection just holding other objects. C-O-U-N-T. Yeah, so there's 16,384 columns on this worksheet. Well, I guess I could have just asked for rows. I didn't have to count the cells in the row. Rows, there's 1.04 million rows there. And then I can ask for the cells that are in that column and so forth. And so, rather than each one of these cells having its own individual name, we can now refer to it by saying, listen, I want to refer to one of those cells in the collection. So let me print my active sheet dot cells, and I could say I want, I don't know, the 500,000th. I should be able to get there. 500,000. That's the 500,000th cell. I wonder what the address of the 500,000th cell is. It's LND31. There's a lot of them, right? LND, I don't even know where, I kind of want to look and see where LND is. So why don't I take that, a reference to that one. So like the point here is that I can just say, hey, I'm talking about just referring by number, referring to one of those items that's in this collection. If I wanted to make that the active cell, what would I do? What method would I put here? Activate would do it, or select, either one. It used to be that you activated sheets and you selected ranges, but they're like common enough. They said, you know what, we can just kind of make that work for the other one. So there's that, you know, there. And if I just started counting at A1 and counted across that whole top row, that would be 16,300 and some odd. And then keep going, going. I would get to 500,000 right here on the worksheet. It's only 31 rows down. Ooh. Okay, so that's the idea of a collection. Tell me how you're feeling on this idea of a collection, having a collection on scale of 0 to 5, that a collection just holds references to other objects. Okay, so far so good, doesn't seem too bad. All right, so we're gonna play with some different collections of objects here in class, but I think I wanna take a minute right now and get us, kind of help you get your development environment set up with 2 changes in the settings that I think will make your life a little bit easier. So here I am in my Visual Basic editor, and I'm going to choose tools. We're going to change the tools and then options. We're going to change a couple of options. So by default, we have this auto syntax check option checked. That means that anytime you make a mistake on a line, like you're typing along a line and you leave that line, the VBA interpreter is going to look at that and go, I don't have any idea what you're talking about. And it will like pop up a message box. And what does that message box say on it? It says like, maybe like has a couple of things, 3 things. I don't know what's on. Anyone remember? The one that you want to be careful not to hit is help, because if you hit that help button, I don't know what's going to happen, but help is not what you're going to get. I mean, it's going to bring up a page that you'll look at and go, that wasn't any help at all. I don't know how we could be so bad at writing like help, like so far after we've invented like programming and stuff, but we still are really bad at it. So it's just really annoying, at least for me, to have that message box pop up. I hit the help button by mistake. I'm like, ah. So I turn that off. Now, I'll still know if there's an error in the line because the line will still turn red. I'm just suppressing that message box from coming up. Now, the other one I want you to change is the very next one too. Here, require variable declaration. Now, you may remember back like on our second class session that we talked about variables. And we saw that you could use this keyword dim to create a variable. But let's go ahead and take a look at some stuff here. So I'm going to say OK on that. And with require variable declaration checked, when I insert a module, which I'm going to do now, insert module to give me a place to write code that'll stick around here, it will now say option explicit at the top. That shows up because I turned on that require variable declaration. What that means is that if I had some sub procedure here that was like, I don't know, object demo, object demo, okay, if I said, you know, dim x as an integer, x equals 5, debug.print x. And I run that, it's going to print 5. Now, I've got to declare that variable. What would happen if I just didn't declare the variable? Put it next time to a comment. I'm not declaring that variable. It's going to say, look, you got to define the variable before you can use it. But the only reason that happens is because this is what I told it to do. By saying option explicit, that tells the VBA interpreter, if I use a variable, I have to declare it first. Let me just take this off. And it should be amazing to folks that now, without declaring that variable, if I run this code, that's going to execute just fine, even without declaring the variable. Now, we remember that the philosophy of the language, when they're making this in the early 90s, they're saying, listen, we've got, we've got non-programmers that are just like Excel users that we're hoping to kind of come in here and be productive with VBA. And so the philosophy of the language is if the programmer tells the interpreter to do something that is not clear, instead of just stopping and saying, we don't know what you're talking about, which is what most programming languages will do. We don't know what you mean by that. The philosophy of VBA is to say, let me see if I can figure this out. And so here's what happens. It gets here and it goes, say x equals 5. And the Visual Basic interpreter has to go, x? That sounds familiar. What's x? And it says, it kind of goes through all of its possible things. There's no statement of the language. It's no object that I know about. What else could it be? Might be a variable. There's no variable that's declined or defined, but it says that's the only thing I can think that it must be. And so it will actually declare a variable in the background, and then it'll allocate memory for that, bind it to that name, and then you can just use it. What type do you think it makes it? Like if you just use variables without declaring them, what type of variable do you think it's going to be? Like of all the types that we learned back on the second day, you probably haven't started. I mean, we're like weeks away from the midterm, so you probably haven't started even reviewing that stuff yet. But anyone remember a data type? Could you guess? Yeah. So there's a type called variant, which is it has like 22 bytes of overhead because we don't know what you're going to do with it, and that's what it does. It says, well, it's a variable. We don't know what you're going to do with it. Make it variant, and then it works okay. So, but the reason that you want option explicit is because one of the most difficult errors to track down when you're debugging is a misspelled variable name. Now, if it's just one character, it's kind of tough to misspell, and you can see it misspelled pretty easily. But if it's like a long variable name, like current average salary or something, and you transpose a couple of letters in there, it can be really difficult to see. And so you're going to think about this option explicit here as being your spelling checker for your variable name. So if I had this called you see, I have a problem with misspelling variable names. Just get so excited. And then, I was to come down here and try to print that, only, I left off one of those E's. If I run this, it's going to say, actually, it's going to get right here and tell you that's not spelled right? That's the variable you have not defined. Well, yeah, I have it right there. What do you, interpret? You know what you're talking about? Oh, then I can see it's a misspelling. So that is, that's probably more than I should have told you about that. But so I think you should have option explicit always turned on, which forces you to declare your variables. That was number one, it's a good habit. And number two, it will help you debug. Okay. So let's talk about, kind of the highest level, or one of the highest level collections, and that's the collections of all of your workbooks. Okay, so object demo, I guess I'm going to leave that the way it is. We'll stop that, and I'll come here and make another one, make it above here. Workbooks demo. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and run this that prints workbooks. So the name of that, so the object called workbooks is the collection of all of your open workbooks. Every collection has a property called count. So I can always, if I have got some property, I can always just say, hey, I want to see the count of that. And so that will tell me how many workbooks I have. Now, is that how many workbooks are on this computer? Is it how many workbooks are, in my home directory? Which workbooks are being counted by this? This is all of the workbooks that are currently open. Yeah, currently open. It doesn't know anything about any workbooks that might be sitting on a hard drive somewhere. This is workbooks that are open. Now, are there any of you here that you just have one workbook open, and when you printed it, it's told you there's two open? Anyone? Yeah. Were you surprised by that, or do you know why it's showing two? You were surprised. The reason that it's showing two is because you have recorded a macro in your personal macro workbook. And remember, that personal macro workbook gets opened automatically every time you open Excel. And so if you were to look over here, like in your Project Explorer, which would like view, if it's not showing Project Explorer, you will see that there's the air traffic control one, or air traffic passenger statistics, and you've got another one here called personal.xlsb. Is that true? Oh, never mind. He doesn't know what he's talking about. I know what I'm talking about. Do you have another workbook listed over here? There's a couple others over there. Yeah. Oh, so you thought you had 4 open. I have 4 open. So you'll see add-ins here that won't show up in your list of workbooks. And there can be other reasons why, apparently there can be other reasons that a workbook will open, but anyway. Okay. So it's a reference to the collection of all of the workbooks that are currently open. Now, with this collection, I can refer to these elements of a collection. I can always refer to the elements of a collection by their ordinal position. So I can say workbook sub 1 in parentheses and tell it I want to refer to the very first element in that collection, and I'll ask for what the name of that is. And it's going to tell me, that's the name. I can, ask for the name. And I could then do stuff with it. I could close it. I could save it. I could copy a workbook. I don't know, what methods do we have for this? There's no copy. Not a whole lot of methods here. I could convert comments, whatever that method does. I could close it. That's pretty easy. I can check in. I have no idea what it means to check in with a workbook. Change link. Anyway, these are all methods of that particular workbook. Okay, so but when the objects that are in the collection you're working with are named, like if they have names, does the workbook have a name? Yeah, workbook has a name. And so if it's a named object, you can also refer to them by name. So I'm going to put in here in quotes, I'm going to put in the name of a workbook. And I'll ask for the, what other property might be interested in this? Accuracy, version. Oh, autosave on, whether it's autosave on or not. So right now, autosave is off. And so autosave on is a property that tells me if it's on or off, and that should tell me that it's off. So I'm expecting it to print false. So the point here is that I've got to a particular property of a particular workbook by using its collection to get there. And again, I can use either the number, or if they're named objects, I can use the name. That'll be the same information there. Question? Will your personal workbook always be number 1? So if you have a personal macro workbook, it should be number 1 because it gets open right when you open Excel, and then anything else you open happens after that. It brings up a good point, and that is that the ordinal position is the order in which the workbooks were opened. So the first one open is number 1. If you open another one, it will be number 2. If you create another one after that, it'll be number 3. So let's just do that. I'm going to go ahead and create another workbook. So most collections also have a way for you to create new instances of the collection. Now, the collection of all your columns in Excel, you can't create a new column in Excel. You have a fixed number of columns. Same thing with the rows. But workbooks here, work, W-O-R-K-B-O-K-S, has an add method. So workbooks.add, and that will create another. When I run that, that will create another, it will open up another workbook. It'll be a brand new empty workbook. So when I run this, it's going to print the count of my workbooks, but I'm opening one before. So this should print 2. I'm going to come up here and print this right now because you're going to see that's just 1 right now. When I run this, it's going to open a new workbook. And now it printed 2. And in fact, I've got 2 workbooks open. So there's my number 2 and there's my number 1 open. See if I can keep my phone from making any more noise. Okay, and of course, I can close them as well. So workbooks.add, let me do this, workbooks. Here's an interesting question. What would I have to put here to close the workbook that just got added by the line before? How could I get that? So workbooks. Now I know that when I run this, it's going to be the 3rd workbook because there's 2 right now. And when I run it again, it's going to be 3, but it's only going to be 3 because I happen to have 2 workbooks open. What if I want to close the workbook that was just created? How could I do that? What would I put in here to figure out what's the one that was just barely created? Ooh, pardon me. Now I'm ready to hear. Say it. I'm sorry. Say it again. Oh, okay. Okay. So you're saying this is going to be called, like, go by its name. Put here in quotes, like book 3. That would work. But again, it's only because I'm pretty sure that's going to be. The last one I created was called book 2. So I'm pretty sure the next one I create is going to be called book 3. But if I run it again, it won't do it. It'll try to close book 3 again, and that would cause an error. Yeah. Oh, so you're thinking of like Python or JavaScript that lets you say -1. So instead of the first one counting the other direction. No, it doesn't work. We're rolling the clock back to before you were born. We hadn't thought of great things like that. So no, you can't put a negative index. Yeah. Yes. So remember, workbooks.count tells me how many there are open. And so if I was to put workbooks and then in here put workbooks.count, that would be the last one, be the third one. Or if it's the 99th one that I just got created, it would be the 99th one. And that will refer then to the most recent one. I can then say .close, and that will close it. Now, this is a method, and it takes an argument here. This is save changes. I think we talked about this in class last time. I'm going to say here false, because I don't want to have to be prompted with it. So save changes is false. And then we should see that then create and then disappear right when I run this. It'll print 3, but it's going to then close it immediately as well. It happened pretty quick. Did you see it? I'll do it again. It opened and then opened. Oh, it's happening so fast. And so each time I ran that, it's still 3 because it was closing that other one. Now, sometimes it's convenient to refer to it by its index, but other times you might say, oh boy, I want to be sure that I'm talking about that one. It could be that the process I'm doing is going to open up 4 or 5 different workbooks, and I have to keep them straight. You know, and one has the customer file in it, and the other one has some data that I have to import for that customer file. Another one has, I don't know, some other thing. And I got to kind of have several open and kind of keep them all straight from each other. Oh. And it may be that by the time I'm writing the code, I don't know what the names of the files are going to be. So I can't refer to them by their names because it could be like the user is going to open a workbook. And then maybe I'll give them a way to choose another workbook. And however that one opens, I'm going to want to say, yeah, that one that just got opened. And so as it turns out, every single one of these workbooks is loaded into memory. So it's sitting there in memory, and it's happening at a particular location in memory. Like there's a place in memory where that workbook is loaded. Remember, that's where we have to put data that we want to have readily accessible. In fact, when we say we're opening a workbook, we're going to read it off the stable storage, off the disk, and put it into memory so we've got really quick access to it. Well, I would like to just remember where that thing is located in memory, but I don't want to have to think about it by its memory address. I want to think about it by its name. And what's the thing that we do when we want to have a location in memory where we can put something and then refer to that item that's in that location in memory? What do we create to be able to allow us to do that? That is called, say it louder. It's a variable, yeah. And so I'm going to create a variable that's going to let me kind of bind on to that same location in memory where this workbook is. Here's how I do it. Dim WB as an object. And now here's the thing. When this workbooks.add method runs, it does a couple of things. First thing it does is it makes a brand new workbook and it puts it in memory somewhere. But then it actually sends back a reference to where it is in memory. So if I have a way to capture that, if I can say, because it really is, it's going to make that workbook and it's going to send right back to my code, here's the address where it is. I want to be able to capture that location where that is. And so I'm going to take my object variable and I'm just going to say set WB equal to, because when this runs, it's going to go and do what it does and it sends back the memory address, right? It's going to send back the location in memory where that's stored. And so if I capture that in a variable, and when I'm using an object variable, I don't just assign it to it. And the reason is because when VBA is guessing at what you mean, when you haven't quite done it right, it might guess wrong here. And so it says, if you're working with object variables, we're going to require you to know that it's a little bit different and you have to use the keyword set. That's going to bind this variable onto that object. And now, from here on out, I can use WB to refer to that workbook. WB dot name. In fact, it would be exactly the same, right? This little trick here is going to get my most recently opened workbook. And I could print that one as well. And that should print the name of the newly created workbook twice. Once by going at it after it numerically, and then once by referring to it by the object that we, like the direct reference to that object. Okay, so what am I expecting this to print now? I think we did book we were book 2, 3, 4, 5. It's going to print like book 6 or 7 is going to be the name that shows up. And it should print it twice, and then it should print a 3, and then it will close. So let's go ahead and get rid of that, and we'll run this. Yeah, so book 7, it opened book 7 briefly, kind of gave us 2 different ways to refer to that newly created book, and then closed it. So being able to set up an object variable that allows me to bind on to one of the objects in the collection, I could also let me make another object variable here. Dim WB air as object. And then I could set WB air equal to work books. Can I type that whole thing? Not really. And so let me print here WB name, WB air. So in this case, I'm binding on one of these object variables onto like a particular element of this. And then here I'm just saying, hey, wherever that gets created, just refer to it. And the reason that this works is because that's what this workbooks collection is doing, is it's saying, it's actually keeping track of the workbook collection has a list of memory addresses built into it as to where these workbooks are. So that's actually what workbooks sub 1 is, or workbooks sub this gets evaluated to that location in memory where the workbook is. And so I can just capture it here. And so I don't have to even refer to it as the workbooks collection. I can use that collection to create a variable that's pointing at that same location that is remembering the address of where that workbook is. And then I can use that in place of any other way I would refer to the workbook. So that should do air traffic passenger statistics and then book 8 when I run it this time, F5. Okay, one more thing on the way that we use these object variables, and that is object. When I declare a variable of type object, it is that object variable can bind on to any kind of object. I could use that variable to bind onto a range or to a cell or to a sheet or to an axis on a sheet or to the bottom border of a cell. Those are all objects, and I could allow that variable to bind onto it. So if I'm saying, listen, what I really want to do is this is only ever going to bind onto a worksheet, then I could dim it as a worksheet. And it doesn't change anything else except, well, 2 things. One is it now says the only kind of object it's allowed to bind onto is a worksheet object. But more importantly, and the reason you might do this, let's see what happens if I type in WB underscore air and then dot. I hit the dot there and I get absolutely no help. And the reason is the Visual Basic Editor says, I don't know what that's going to be referring to. It could be referring to anything. But my my WB variable is only allowed to refer to, whoops, we'll talk about worksheets later, sorry. Workbook. It's only allowed to bind onto a workbook. And so when I hit dot here, it goes, oh, well, you must mean something that a workbook can do. And so that's the real reason that I take the time to actually declare an object variable as the right kind of object, is so that when I'm working with it, I get the IntelliSense help, because it's nice to be able to know what are my options at this point. Object variables are one of the more difficult things. They're one of the more abstract things we cover in this class. And so if you're looking at this point going, oh, wow, I'm having difficulty, it's not the end of the world. We're going to cover these ideas a few more times. But just show me how comfortable you are with the idea of an object variable being able to collect onto an element of a collection. 1, 2, 3, 0 would be, is okay too. Okay, so 3, you're seeing some of it here, but you're not quite on stable legs with this, and that's okay. That's an okay place to be at this point. Okay. So that's the workbooks collection. You want to see any other burning questions you have about workbooks and what you might be able to manipulate with workbooks? It has an open method, so you can open it and give it a full path to work. Should we see it open? Let's go ahead and see how to open an existing workbook. So let's do one last thing, and then we'll move on to worksheets. So I'll just open one down here at the bottom. workbooks.open. Now, I'm going to need the full path to a particular workbook, which I think I have in my downloads folder. So over here in my downloads folder, I've got founding quotes. That's the quotes that we do at the beginning of class. So I'm just going to copy this path. And sorry, Mac users, I don't know of a really good way to like get the path to a file on a Mac. But over here in the File Explorer, if I click here, not on one of these things, but off to the right, it'll give me the path to that location. So workbooks.open, and then I can put that path / what was it, founding quotes. And so that should open up that workbook. So let's go ahead and run this. It'll do all that normal stuff and then end up opening that workbook for us. Now, here's kind of an important distinction here. And this is one of the confusing things about VBA, how I wish they had made the language differently on this particular point. Let me close that down. And that is sometimes when we call a method, do I have one here? Workbooks, we don't have a method, it's here. Sometimes we put parentheses around the arguments and sometimes we don't. Let me tell you why we do it one way versus the other way. So in this case, even though when I open a workbook, it's going to load that workbook into memory and return the memory address where it's located. It's going to send something back. But if I'm not doing anything, if I don't care to do anything with the value that comes back with that, I don't put parentheses around the argument list. Right? They're just not necessary. And if I've got more than one argument, they're not allowed. It ends up working out okay if I only have one argument for more of a reason than I want to explain today. But what if I said, no, I want workbook to be bound onto this one. I want to set WB equal to this one. If I try to run this, it's going to say, you're not allowed to do that. And even though that works just fine before when I open this, the fact that I'm using the value that comes back, I'm catching it in this variable, says you now have to put parentheses around the argument. Put parentheses around that. And now that will work. The real reason is because if my function is going to return a value, I could actually use that as the input to another function. I can like nest this function call as an argument to another function. And if I do that without parentheses, it will get confused about which arguments belong to which call in the function, which function that I'm calling. I probably don't want to take the time to kind of show that full example today. But the point is that if I'm going to capture, if I'm going to do anything with the value that comes back from this, whether it's a function or a method, then I have to put parentheses around the argument. And man, that is a really difficult thing to have to grapple with when you're first learning this language. Today, like every modern programming language today is like, just put parentheses all the time. Just always use parentheses. Why didn't they think of that in the 1990s? I don't know. They were making like thousands and thousands of decisions when they're making this language. And I think the idea was, well, there's no, if we're not doing something here, you don't have to have them. So why make people type them in? And the answer to that is so we don't have to think about whether we should type them in or not. That we would prefer that. So that's the difference. Okay. Any other questions then on working with workbooks? Let me show you one more thing because it might be a little bit confusing, even though this is probably something you won't run into often. And that is when I ask for the questions of workbooks, it is not all the workbooks that are open on my computer. It's all the workbooks that are open in this instance of Excel. Could I load Excel into memory twice and have Excel running twice side by side? Yeah, I can. You don't normally have a good reason to do that, but you can. I'm going to show you how to do it. And it's not really important. We're never going to need this in our class. Let me just show you real quick. So if I'm over here and I'm typing, here's my link to Excel right here. If I hold down the Alt key, like the Alt key on my keyboard and click Excel and keep it holding down until it opens, it's going to prompt and say, oh, do you want to start a new instance of Excel? Why, yes, I do. And so, this looks like just another workbook that's open here. But if I do Alt F11 here, it's going to open up a completely different Visual Basic Editor. Control G. Right, so if I was to ask for the workbooks.count here, it's going to tell me 1 because inside this instance, there's only one open right now. there can be some interesting reasons, more advanced reasons why you might say, oh, you know what, I can solve the problem I'm working on by having 2 instances of Excel open. It's beyond the scope for this class. I just want to make it clear to you that it's not every workbook open, it's every workbook open in that instance of Excel. And almost always, you only have 1 instance open. In the back, question. Oh, yeah. So if I have 2 instances open, if I say, oh, over in this instance, open another one, it'll get put into that instance. I can open them up kind of into those 2 instances. Yeah. Go ahead.
How about if you open, not using VBA, but just outside of VBA, open workbook?
Like just double click it? Yeah. Which one will it go to? I don't know. You could try it, find out. Oh, but you're on a Mac. I don't know how to open a new instance on a Mac. But we could try it afterwards. My guess is it would open in the first one that was open, but I'm not entirely sure of that. That's my guess. Okay, let's move on to some other kinds of objects. So let's, in fact, I'm going to close down everything but just my one air traffic passenger sheet. Oh, so here we've got some charts put on this one called charts, and then some statistics. And I think this is just data that's like, how many outbound international flights were there originating in these different airports in different years. So what does this say? We've got activity period. That kind of looks like that's a month. This is going to be data for a month. So it looks like July of 2005. This is TZ. What airport is TZ? Operating airline coordinates? ATA Airlines. Anyway, this is some data here that we're charting over here. We've got a couple of sheets here, and we'll be working with these charts here as well. Okay, so let me go ahead and organize this a little bit differently. Okay, so let's make a new sub-procedure where we're looking at worksheets. Okay, oh, by the way, there's a couple of different ways to refer to a particular workbook, right? One is through the collection. So like workbooks.name or workbook number 1. I could bind a variable onto it, but there's another way. Let me dim WB as a workbook. I can set WB equal to active workbook. So active workbook is it's just whatever workbook happens to be active when the code's running. And so this says, I don't know which workbook is going to be open, but whatever workbook's open, that's the one that I want to capture the reference to. In fact, in my code, I could just refer to as active workbook dot whatever to work with it there. The other one that's really powerful is called this workbook. This workbook says, whichever workbook the code that's currently executing is a part of, that's the workbook we're talking about. And that is often the one that you want, because if you're just saying, hey, whatever workbook's active, you don't know what your user might have had 3 or 4 different workbooks open you weren't expecting, and kind of while your code is running, they activate a different workbook, and all of a sudden your macro is running on that one instead of this one. So this workbook is a good idea. So in fact, I think I'm just going to go ahead and refer to this workbook as I'll use that to refer to it. So here, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to dim WS. I'll just dim S as a worksheet. And then I'm going to refer to this workbook.worksheets. So worksheets then is the collection of all of the worksheets in the workbook that I'm referring to. So I can't just say, well, the truth is I can just say, come up here and say worksheets.count. Okay, so what workbook do you think it's going to be talking about? If I don't tell it which workbook I'm talking about, which one will it assume? A respectable programming language would say, you got to tell me which workbook you're talking about. But VBA is going to say, oh, you didn't tell me which workbook. I'm going to guess the one you probably mean. And which one does it guess? The active one. Yeah, so that'd be exactly the same as saying active workbook. Active workbook. Active. Oh, there it is. There we go. So, yeah, so again, and I guess it's kind of nice. Like if you know that you're talking about the active workbook, you can leave that off. It's probably was gonna say probably a better habit to actually write it in, but no one does. It's normal to just leave off the active workbook, just refer to worksheet. But I'm gonna go ahead and do it right here. So this worksheets.count, if I want to refer to a particular worksheet in here, like the charts worksheet. And now I can set S equal to that, and then debug.print. Print S.name. Now, not that interesting because I told it the name is charts, and now I'm just asking it to give me the name back. But that should be it. I could, instead of referring to S.name, I could say S.range A3.value. And that will give me, whatever the value is of that range on the particular sheet, which was the sheet named charts in this workbook. Go ahead, use code to add a sheet to this workbook. I haven't shown you how to do it, but I bet you can figure it out. And once you've actually executed code that adds a worksheet, just raise your hand and say, I have done it. Someone must have done it by now. Ah, you did it? Did you know how to do it before, or was this your first time doing it? First time. Ah, it's got a few more people that have done it. So you saw what it took to create a new workbook. It was right, refer to the collection, workbooks, add. It's the same thing for a worksheet. So I can just say worksheets, add. You can see right down here, I've got 2 worksheets right now. When I execute this line, it's going to give me a new sheet, sheet 1. Here it is. And so now if I was to ask for worksheets.count, it'll tell me there's 3 there. I can refer to it that way. Now, what I'm about to show you works with a workbook collection. It works with any collection. What I'm going to do is I'm going to iterate across all of the elements of the collection. So here I've just added a worksheet, and now let's just do this. Maybe I should do this as a separate example just to kind of keep it a little straighter. I'm going to call this worksheets iteration demo. Still going to dem S as a worksheet, but now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that variable to allow me to kind of just run some code that I want to do the same for all the worksheets in this workbook. And this is where collections become really powerful, because it says, listen, I want to do something, I want to do the same thing to all the elements of this collection. And so I can say, make me myself a loop that does something to one of them, and then just let it change to a different one. Now you saw here where I use this keyword set to bind this variable onto a particular worksheet. There's a structure that lets me automatically bind it on to the first worksheet and run some code, and then to the second worksheet and run some code, and then to the third worksheet, and then just keep going. And it's a loop. We kind of got introduced to the for next loop. This is called the for each loop. It goes like this. For each, and then I put like this control variable S. This is just an object variable in worksheets. And I end that loop with the keyword next as well. Now, what's going to happen, just like we did down here, where we said, hey, I want to bind S onto one of these worksheets. This is going to say, all right, Excel, bind S onto the first worksheet in this collection, and then run some code. Debug.print S.name. So, and we're going to have a whole day on tools that we have for debugging, but let me just show you one here because it will be really helpful to see what's going on. How many of you have accidentally clicked over here in the gray part, and when you did that, it made a red line, and you went, oh my gosh, what is that? And you clicked again, and it went away, and you went, whew. How many of you had that experience so far? Oh, just a few of you. Okay. What that is, when I do that, that's called a breakpoint. Breakpoint says, all right, when my code runs, run right to that point and then stop there. And just kind of suspend everything and wait for them. So now I'm going to run this. And my yellow line says, that's what the line we're currently getting ready to do. And then once I'm here, I can say debug step. I can do any of these 3 steps, step into, step over, step out. They'll all do the same thing based on what we're doing here. And also it's F8 that executes that. So that will just execute that one line. So now I've started that loop. It's getting ready to do this one. So it hasn't printed anything yet. But what should I expect that to print? I'm iterating across all the sheets. So which one do you think it's going to print? So an interesting choice. Maybe it's going to print the active worksheet. There's another option here, and it's either going to start at the beginning and go forward as it's going forward. It's bound to the first one, or it's going to bind to the last one. Well, I'm going to find that out just by doing debug step, or I'm going to press F8 from now on. That should execute that one. And so it is printed out air traffic passenger statistics. So at this moment, S is bound onto that first worksheet, just as if we had done it down here ourselves. But now when we get to the next line, I'll press F8 to execute that one. It's now bounded onto the next one. So now when I run this part of the code, it's going to print my second one to print sheet 1. Oops, it printed up here because I had clicked on that. And now do F8 again, it'll go through and print the next one, charts. And so this is like one of the really powerful things about collections. You can say, listen, I've got all my worksheets. I want to do something with those worksheets, with all of them. And it may be that what I need to do is that there's one of those worksheets that is a special worksheet to me, but I don't know what the user might have done. They could have changed the name of it. I don't know what this worksheet's going to be named, so I can't just refer to it by its name. But there's some characteristic about it. Like it's the one thing I know has to be true about this sheet is it's the worksheet that says Asia in cell A3. And so I got to go find out which of these sheets I need to work with. But I can only do it by kind of looking at each one and finding out what it is. Let me just do this. Let me dim, actually, I will just leave S that way. That should be okay. I'll go ahead and print the name just for kicks. But then I'm going to say if, oh, you know what? I'm probably doing more than I should here. We haven't even seen the if statement yet. Do you guys want to see this, or should we move on with something simpler? Who's saying, show this? Oh, don't stop. Don't type if and then stop. We're going to have a whole day kind of talking about conditional structures, and this is one. It's maybe a little earlier than I wanted to introduce it. I'll do it real quick. So I'm going to say if, and then I'm going to say S, that worksheet, dot range. So a range on that worksheet, the particular one I'm after is, we've got a whole day talking about ranges too. I'm talking about A3. Wasn't it A3 that charts said Asia, ASIA? If whatever worksheet I'm currently looking at, range 3, if the value of that is equal to, and string comparisons in VBA are case sensitive, so got to have the case correct here, ASIA, then exit 4. Okay, so what exit 4 is going to say is, just get me out of this loop. And so I'm going to stop this, and I'm going to put my debug.print s.name. I'm going to put a breakpoint here. So now it's going to run all the way to here before it stops. We can see that it's printed all 3 of the names. Did it print all 3 of the names? No, it didn't. It printed, oh yeah, because charts is my last one. So I happened to find it on the last one. And now we'll see that S is still bound onto charts, because when I print this, it's going to print the name. So it has now found that sheet. Show F8. So it's print charts here. Now, let's go. I'm going to just change the order of these. So charts is like the first one that comes up. And it's going to find it sooner. Better run this way. So it's printed charts. It found it as the first one and let me out of that loop. So it didn't loop through all of those, because as soon as this condition was true, it then let me out. And so S is bound on that. So the point is, you say, man, I don't know what the worksheet's going to be named. I don't know where it's going to be, because my users, they move their worksheets around all the time. I try to tell them not to do that, but they do it anyway. But I know a characteristic about that sheet. So I can find the sheet that I have to process with my code by looking across them all, finding the one that's set up right, and go, that's the one. And now I can use S to refer to that and go do the rest of the stuff I'm going to do. Questions here? Okay. So that's the idea of going across multiple, like looping across all the objects in a collection. So we've seen workbooks, we've seen worksheets. We're going to have a whole day looking at cells. So let's look at these charts here. We're going to have a day specifically looking at charts. I just want to think of them as elements that can be in a collection here for a moment. So let's go ahead and do another sub procedure here, and we'll call this our chart demo. And an interesting thing about a chart is that a chart is kind of like a hybrid object. There are two objects involved. Anytime you deal with a chart, there are two objects. One is a shape. Now, you probably put shapes on your Excel workbook before, right? You come here and you say, I want to insert something. I'm going to insert a shape. It looks different here when my menus collapse. Where is a shape? Add-ins, illustrations, tables. Oh, illustrations. Shapes, I could just say, I want to put a square. It's a great square. You just put that on my sheet. So, but that's just a shape that's just, it's just a shape. It's a square that has color and line color and size and whatever. So, but when you have a chart, charts have all kinds of other properties like axes and like grid lines and what kind of chart it is and what color the lines are on the chart and so forth. Well, and yet they still have the same properties that shapes, like the size and the location and what their border is. And so it turns out that when you create a chart, you're actually creating a chart and putting it on a shape. And so the chart is actually held inside of a shape. And so even though we're dealing with these charts, because we're not going to be dealing with like the contents or the data that's on the chart, all we're going to do is be moving these charts around. We don't actually have to get to the chart object. We're just going to use the shape object. So I'm going to come here and dim SHP as shape object. And then for each SHP in active sheet dot shapes. Next. And let's just print the names of these. These names are not going to be very interesting names, but this will just let you see that we are getting access to all of them. How many of these do we have, by the way? We got 9 of them. Debug.print SHP dot name. Debug.print. All right, so I'll run this active ACTIVE for each shape in ACO. Active sheet. So they are charts 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Why doesn't it start counting at 1? Because apparently whenever I built this sheet, I made 3 charts initially and I threw them away before I got to the kinds I really wanted to make. So that just has to be what they're named. So, but now I can manipulate, kind of other elements of this. I could like delete them all. I could say shp.delete and it would clear off all the shapes that are on this sheet. Then I wouldn't have very much else to work with. So why don't we do this? Why don't we adjust these? So instead of these being in a grid, let's make them a little bit bigger. And let's put them all in one column. So I don't have to be kind of scrolling around to find, I just want to scroll down to be able to see these charts. So I'll do this. I'll say SHP dot left. So there's a left property that says, where does this chart exist? In fact, before I do that, let me print the name and the left position of SHP dot left. So now it should print the name and it should show. So like the first 3, I think they'll change and then they should repeat because I'm guessing they got built in this order, but I don't know, maybe not. So we'll run this. And chart number 4 is 382, 756, 756. So it looks like our first one is 7. So we should have 3 that are that 7 number, yeah. So they're not going in the same order, but I've got 3 of them that are 7.87 units, whatever those units are, away. And then I've got 3 that are in the middle, so 382, 382, 382, and then I've got 3 that are 756, 756, 756. Okay, so that's where they currently are, but I want to change them. So I'm going to say, I'm going to put them all to be 10. Now that is just going to, will collapse these. It's not going to change the top at all, but it's going to collapse these so that they're kind of all on top of each other. We'll fix that here in just a bit. We'll see that happen. Bloop. So I haven't deleted them. They're just on top of each other. And if I run it again, it would put them right back where they were. So now I'd like to be able to space them. Let's make them a little bit wider while we're at it. So shp.width equals, let's see, if that's 10, let's try 500. I think that'll probably fit on my screen. Oh yeah, we can go 1,000. Let's go 800. That'll be about the same with the data, I think. That's a little bit wider. That's and it's they're kind of stretched out now. So let's adjust their height as well. And let's make them say 400, 500. Let's see. Twice as wide, 5. Maybe 550. Oh. HEIGHT. Okay. Probably bigger than I need them, but now I think the last thing I need to do is figure out how to make these so that they're like spaced down from each other. Like, so they're not sitting on top of each other, but they all move down. First of all, before I do that, we're looking at this. How many of you are going, I'm totally following what you're doing here? 5 is like, yeah, I got it. And the 3 is, whew, okay, so this looks like you're mostly coming along here. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to say, listen, if it's the first one that I'm dealing with, I want to put it, maybe down here 200 units down. But after that, I want to put it down below the one that was before it. Probably a better example to do. I'm going to do it this way. Yeah. I'm going to do this. Let's declare a variable here. Dim. I'm going to call this last top. It sounds like last stop, but it's last top as a single precision floating point number. So you notice that when we're asking for these widths, it's coming back not as an integer, but it's coming back as a floating point number. So when we're dealing with positioning and sizing charts and shapes and stuff, we're dealing with decimal numbers. So let's do this. I'm going to say, because we want to adjust the top as well here. So let me do another if statement here. I'm going to say if, now the default value for that is going to be 0. So if last top, last top equals 0, which will be the first time through, then we'll do something. And again, I'm not giving you all the details around this if statement. So today, just type and believe. So when this is true, we'll execute what's in this block. When it's false, we'll execute what's in this block. So when it's 0, in fact, I want to do this when it's greater than 0, it'd be better. When it's greater than 0, I haven't changed it yet. It's going to be 0 the first time through. When it's greater than 0, then I want to set my shape dot top equal to my last top. I'm trying to figure out how to talk through this because there's a couple more pieces that have to work before this will make sense. Let me just go ahead and do them in order here, then we'll talk once we get it there. So after I've done that, I'm setting the top to where I want it to be. I'm going to record where that top is. So my last top is going to be equal to shp.top. Because I'm not setting it to last top, I'm setting it to last top plus a little bit of space, 10, plus my shape's height. So the first time, last top is going to be 0, so I'm not going to do this. So I'm going to set the left, and that's it. We're done. But then I'm going to say, how high was my last one? it's as high as the one that I just set it to. So it's going to pick up the top from where that first one is. The next time through, top is now going to be greater than 0. And so it's going to set the shape I'm working on that time through equal to whatever it was, plus a little margin, plus the height of it. So this should cause these now all to just line up vertically along that left margin. And there they are. So all 9 of them now are just equally spaced and lined up. I think I'd like to make these a little bit smaller, like 500, 300, and zoom in a bit. So the problem was here is that the one that happens to be first wasn't on that top row. So this is my first one. So I'm just going to bring this one up because it's reading the position that we want to start with in that location. So I'll run that again, and that should line them up right underneath that first one. So that's a little bit about dealing with collections of objects for existing built-in objects and collections that we have. So we're going to have another day where we talk just about dealing with charts. So we'll learn all about dealing with charts. We'll have another day where we talk about that if statement in gory detail. And another day where we're talking about ranges, because obviously we've got collections of ranges, and there's enough for a whole day just dealing with ranges. Oh, I'm feeling like I've told you enough today. I've said enough already. And we've got a couple more minutes. So if there's a question that's kind of around this space, I'd be glad to answer it. Otherwise, I'm not opposed to letting us out a bit early today. Any questions? All right, thanks for coming. I will see you next week. Class dismissed. Oh, you're too kind. Thank you. Thank you. What a great audience. Yes, my child. You don't want everyone to hear this.
Positions for like the shape, and I'm going to like, okay, go to the last height. So if you position for that for like
You want to see it? Okay. Oh, I'll stop recording. Person listening to the video was like,